This is Charlotte Talks. I'm Mike Collins. On the local news roundup, President Trump issues an ultimatum to Governor Roy Cooper, demanding a definitive answer about whether we'll play host to a full-fledged convention. Where that stands, COVID-19 cases continue to rise here, 1 week into phase 2 of the state's reopening. Is there a connection? Some gyms sue the governor in their quest to reopen, as do some strip clubs. CMS complies with the state's opening date for schools. American Airlines cuts staff, and the county sets its post-COVID-19 budget. Our roundtable of reporters is ready to flesh out those stories and more. Joining us, WFAE's David Borax. Good morning to you.
Morning, Mike.
Jonathan Lowe is here. He's a reporter anchor for Spectrum News. Good morning, Jonathan.
Good morning, Mike.
Katie Peralta is senior editor for Charlotte Agenda. Good morning.
Morning.
And Joe Bruno is a reporter for WSOC TV Channel 9 Eyewitness News. Welcome back, Joe.
Hey, Mike.
This is the week the number of COVID-19 deaths surpassed 100,000 in the United States. We lead the world in cases, we lead the world in deaths, and in not enough tests being available. But this is also the week as states across the South reopened in the face of rising numbers of COVID-19 cases that President Trump issued an ultimatum to Governor Roy Cooper here in North Carolina. Specifically, he said, Governor, you have 1 week to promise an unfettered convention in Charlotte, or he will move the convention elsewhere.
We have to know that when the people come down, they're going to have the doors open. Now, if the governor can't tell us very soon, unfortunately, we'll have no choice.
So North Carolina, Charlotte, and the Republican National Committee had been working very closely on this, hadn't they, up to this point?
Yes, and they had a great relationship, too.
Right, that was the messaging.
Okay. Has President Trump been in on these negotiations? Has he been informed about the progress of these negotiations, where they stood by his own people?
From what I understand, RNC officials have kept him in the loop, but you have to keep in mind, he is not a party in this contract, so he isn't directly involved with the negotiations.
So a president,
up until this point, the GOP has had a great relationship with local and our state officials. And there have been plenty of times where the GOP officials could have had a rocky relationship. I mean, think about it. Charlotte City Council toyed around with not accepting the convention. They almost rescinded the invite. And the GOP officials kind of took everything in stride up until the president's tweets. That's when we started to see this relationship start to sour.
To add to that point that Joe makes, I mean, even up until the $50 million, the vote on the $50 million, federal safety and security grant. I mean, that just happened like 2-3 weeks ago while we've been in the pandemic. That was I know in talking to council members, that was yet another kind of, defining moment in this process of where things could have gotten off the rails and they didn't.
The president is considered to be the head of the party, whatever party that president happens to belong to at the time. Does the head of the party have the right to say, I'm moving the convention?
He can say what he wants, but, is it really real? I mean, is that a reality that can happen? You talk to city council members, even Republican Ed Driggs questioned while, trying to how do you side with his president? He still kind of contradicted it by saying you cannot move 2 years worth of work to another city and allow it to happen in 3 months. It's just
I think if the president would have came out after the council discussed rescinding the invitation last summer and said, hey, okay, Charlotte, we'll find somewhere else to hold it, then he might have had a better chance a year out, but we're 3 months away from the convention now. It's going to be.
So in his original tweet, he said, I love the great state of North Carolina so much that I insisted on having the Republican National Convention in Charlotte at the end of August. And as is the case with 18,000 other statements made by the president, that is demonstrably false. We are the only city that put in a bid for the convention. There were no other legitimate choices. That is correct, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, it came down to Charlotte and Vegas's bid wasn't backed by the city or their convention center.
Right. So
really like
Trump's tweet,
football game versus Mark High School.
Trump's tweet went on. Unfortunately, Democratic Governor Roy Cooper is still in shutdown mood and unable to guarantee that by August we will be allowed full attendance in the arena. And then he asked for an immediate answer from the governor. And later altered his demand to give him a week, to give Governor Roy Cooper a week to make a decision. But the governor's response came much quicker than that.
I hope that we can find some kind of reasonable accommodations, but we're not going to sacrifice the health and safety of North Carolinians. And that's the bottom line.
And he then asked the Republican National Committee for, I guess, a letter outlining their plans for keeping this convention safe. They sent that letter. I guess it was received yesterday. It was a 3-page letter. And then they turned the tables on the governor and asked him for guidelines within 1 week. Yikes.
It's really hard to believe that after all the planning that they've been doing and after the couple of months that we've been under this pandemic, that all they could come up with was really basically a 2-page letter and a few bullet points about what they're planning to do. It's kind of shocking. I mean, if we look at what other industries have done in order to get open in North Carolina, they've submitted big plans. I mean, how did NASCAR get permission to reopen Charlotte Motor Speedway for racing, albeit with no fans, but they had to present, a couple dozen pages of recommendations. And, this one doesn't mention masks. It's mostly emphasizing the big economic windfall for North Carolina that will be missed out on.
Yeah.
And if
they say in the letter that they will include daily online healthcare questionnaires and pre-travel health surveys for the attendees, and they would get thermal scans prior to boarding sanitized, prearranged transportation and health checks before entering the arena. But as you point out, David, no mention of face masks, no mention of social distancing. This is all about doing this convention the way the president would like it to see it in normal times. And are they going this route because they don't feel the need for social distancing and face masks, or because the president doesn't feel the need for social distancing and face masks?
I just gotta say, I've interviewed Marshall E. Kelly like 3 times now, and in every interview she said, we'll follow whatever guidelines the state wants us to, if that means social distancing and if that means masks. So I was surprised to not see either of those mentioned in the letter yesterday.
These are conversations that the state is having with any event planning industry, any professional sports team. The Carolina Panthers or Charlotte Hornets were both mentioned yesterday. Of course, NASCAR got the go ahead after outlining these very clear plans. But the groups that really want to make this happen, like the NASCAR and the Coca-Cola 500, have figured out ways to do it with extreme social distancing. Every time you turn on a NASCAR race now, racers will be seen with those masks on. They do interviews with their masks on. They're really making it a point to make it known that they're following these guidelines. And the state, kind of pointed to NASCAR as an example of how to do this right. So it was very surprising to see masks and social distancing explicitly not mentioned in that letter.
Now, and I think it's to Katie's point. So remember, this all started last weekend, over the holiday weekend, when the president first sent that first shot of, that he's looking for other options. He wants full capacity on the convention floor. We also this weekend saw our highest day over day increase in new COVID-19 lab confirmed cases. Yes, we're doing more testing, but North Carolina is one of the states that's going through some sort of reopening, but is also still seeing these large increases. Again, yesterday we saw, I think it was 780 some new cases. So the question is, will the RNC, by the time we get 3 months down the road, and we look at how many cases we are in, whether we've hit our peak in the state, will they have a leg to stand on when it comes to the health and safety of not just people that are showing symptoms, but also the asymptomatic people that could get others sick by not wearing masks and not doing those social distancing things?
Almost immediately, 3 other states volunteered to hold the convention: Florida, Texas, and Georgia, all controlled by Republican governors. Even in, I think, Florida and in Texas, cases are rising. They're not rising as fast in Georgia, but is the reason they are so eager to jump on board here, not just economically, but because they want to curry favor with the president. They're Republican governors. Is that what this is about? Are they not concerned about COVID-19 at all?
Well, some of these other states have been a little bit more a little bit quicker with their reopening plans. In Florida, for instance, wasn't it in Jacksonville that they had the Ultimate Fighting Championship, for instance? So I think that that's, of course, seen as an advantage for them because they would be perhaps more willing to facilitate large crowds in a few months. But again, this thing is so fluid. We have no idea what it'll look like months from now. You know, we know what these states look like right now, but who's to say there won't be another spike?
So the vice chair of the Mecklenburg Republican Party, Sarah Reedy Jones, told Joe that she thinks it is doubtful the convention is going anywhere.
I think it would be awfully difficult to do anything in 90 days, let alone a major convention. And I think at the end of the day, North Carolina legislators and elected officials will do what's in the best interest for the economics of North Carolina.
So, Joe, is she saying that in the end, state officials will take the path to riches over the path to keeping people safe if that's the choice that they are presented with? Is that what she's saying?
Sarah was very clear, though. She expects that there will be safety measures in place. She also told me that she's ready to get a big elephant mask and wear it proudly inside the arena if that's what she has to do. But of course, the Mecklenburg County GOP is hoping that, we can get some money flowing in our city and get some attendees at this convention this summer.
Here's the other thing. So one of the things that city officials and, city boosters had talked about is the economic impact of the RNC. And I think a lot of people roll their eyes at the term economic impact because there's no real way to actually know what the economic impact will be. But it's projected to be somewhere around the $160 million mark for Charlotte.
And can't we look back at the Democratic convention and assess the economic impact of that and just make predictions based on that?
Yeah, you can make predictions based on that, and you can kind of make generalizations about the boost for the local tourism industry. It would be hugely welcomed by, restaurants and hotels and places that have really seen a huge crush in business because of COVID. Yeah. At the same time, any talk of a virtual convention, having people tune in virtually could cut down significantly on the number of travelers here. So I really question that economic impact number at this point in time if we're not able to have, all 50,000 visitors as was the original projection.
And we're not hearing anything near this uproar over what the Democrats have said about their convention this summer. They are suggesting that it will be scaled back, maybe partially virtual. I think one of the differences between what we're hearing from Trump and the Republicans and what we're hearing from other kinds of event organizers is an acknowledgement that the virus is still out there and that it's an issue for us. And I think that's something that if the state were to hear something along those lines and we were to get the feeling that the convention organizers were taking seriously the idea that the virus is still spreading, we could have people coming together again. But once it gets onto Twitter, I think it takes off into a orbit of its own.
And the president doesn't want to acknowledge that the virus is still out there. He wants to move on because that's in his best interest. It would be any politician's best interest for things to move on from where we are today. Democrats and Republicans on council have been fairly united. There's been some dissension about this convention over time, but Larkin Eggleston, a Democrat's been supportive until now.
There's no way for the governor at this point to say you can have an arena full of people or that Charlotte can have 50,000 people coming in town for any event. And frankly, I think the only thing you could say definitively is that wouldn't be responsible 3 months from now. So if we're going to host this convention, it's going to have to look very different than we thought it was going to, and the president should acknowledge that.
Clearly, that won't happen. We'll talk, however, more about this and many other topics as we continue with the News Roundup this hour. Coming right back after this break at Charlotte Talks. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and Novant Health, providing emergency care for people experiencing stroke or heart attack because every second counts. More about the signs and symptoms of stroke and heart attack at novanthealth.org/ER. Coming up on Monday on this program, a You Are Here moment in this political year. We're going to get to the lay of the land politically. June 1st was the week that the Democratic presidential race was supposed to cross the finish line with a final set of primaries that will not happen now because of the pandemic. It upended everything and pretty much everything else connected to politics, like conventions. That's up in the air. And as the death toll exceeds 100,000, the president appears more focused on his beef with Twitter. over tweets about mail-in voting and other things, and we'll talk about all of that. It just continues to unfold. We'll talk about it all Monday at 9.
The outrage over George Floyd's death is met with street protests and a renewed debate over police brutality.
What I saw was wrong at every level.
And a confrontation in New York Central Park sparks a different debate about whether dialing 911 is less an emergency call and more of a threatening one. That and much more on the Friday News Roundup next time on 1A.
The roundup of the week's news continues with 1A from 10 to noon after Charlotte Talks on 90.7 WFAE.
It's Charlotte Talks on listener-funded 90.7 WFAE and 90.3 WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. It's the local news roundup. That's why David Borax is here from WFAE News, Katie Peralta from the Charlotte Agenda, Jonathan Lowe, anchor reporter for Spectrum News, and Joe Bruno from WSOC-TV Channel 9. Eyewitness News. Democratic City Councilman, we were talking before the break about the convention, whether it's coming or not, the decisions going back and forth, the arguments going back and forth between the president, the Republican National Convention Committee, and the city of Charlotte and the governor of North Carolina. Democratic City Councilman Malcolm Graham pointed out, quote, the president himself said that he was giving the authority to the governors to open up their states the way they see fit. Does this ultimatum that the president issued this week, I think it was this week, it flies so quickly you can't remember anymore, does that fly in the face of that statement by the president? Or is it merely that if Cooper makes what the president considers to be the wrong choice, he'll move the convention? Is this hypocrisy or a lack of leadership or a lack of organization? What is this?
I think lots of points are being scored back and forth on both sides here. And if you can bring up a statement that somebody made in the past that contradicts something that's happening now, it's considered a political win. I mean, Malcolm Graham makes a good point there. You know, the president has said it's up to the governors. But again, it seems like one of those situations where some people feel the rules don't need to apply to them.
Although the city has been at the forefront of bringing this convention to town, the topic came up during this week's Mecklenburg County Commission budget meeting, and Democratic Commissioner Trevor Fuller felt compelled to say that he felt the president's demand was insulting.
If the president wants to go somewhere else, go. And don't let the door hit you on the behind when you're gone.
Actually, that sounds very presidential these days, that comment. Meanwhile, the vice president, Mike Pence, was on Fox News soon after the president's original tweet tossing out possible sites for a relocated convention.
You know, there are states around the country. We think of Texas, we think of Florida, Georgia, the last two states I visited last week that have made a tremendous progress on reopening their communities and reopening their economies.
Is it not true, once again, let's point this out, that where this is happening, this early reopening, is it not happening at the expense of rising COVID-19 cases? Am I imagining that?
No, you're exactly right. And the other thing is, okay, so you have those three states. What city are you going to host a convention in? A lot of these major cities in these states are democratically controlled as well and don't necessarily want the convention or have the same concerns that Governor Roy Cooper does. It looks like Jacksonville might be the best option if they leave Charlotte, but then there's a whole plethora of issues with Jacksonville as well, including whether or not that city can even handle a convention the size of the RNC.
I mean, Ed Driggs brought up this point. He said, let's start with the U.S. Secret Service. I mean, these security officials have been doing advanced work in Charlotte for the better part of a year. I remember when they were here this time last year, checking out the city. And so he says, like, you know, start with the Secret Service. Let's reach out to them and see what they think about the possibility of moving it to another city. And if they think from a security standpoint, if that's something that could even happen.
I mean,
I highly doubt it.
I certainly understand that, but I also know that the president, any president, not just this one, can decide to go somewhere tomorrow and suddenly he's there. So the Secret Service can make plans and work with local law enforcement to make his security what it needs to be, it would seem to me. And Atlanta comes to mind, because Atlanta, they've certainly vetted Atlanta because of the Olympics years ago. Why would that really be a problem? The Secret Service acting, they have 2 months to figure this out.
Yeah, but you're talking about an event. That's why CNPD, for instance, has not talked about, we've asked multiple times how much of that 50 million has been spent. That's because they've already figured out cordon off areas in uptown Charlotte. They've already figured out secure areas and as you say, vetted certain, according to Ed Driggs, he is highly doubtful that another city could replicate that in 3
And
months.
it's not just a rally, it's 4 days of programming. I mean, second to the Olympics, law enforcement has said that conventions are like the biggest thing that you can have. It takes time to plan and prepare for these things.
And the mayor has often pointed out, when people are saying, why are you letting this happen? Why are you letting this convention come here? She's often pointed out that we are an inclusive city and that we have a contractual obligation. Contracts work in 2 directions. So if they pull this convention, would there be penalties? Would they have to pay the city?
I don't see how they could pull the convention and not be found to breach the contract. So yes, I believe that if they pulled it, they would probably fight the city, but the city would be expecting some compensation.
I mean, that's essentially what the city attorney told the city council when the city council was on the fence about possibly not moving forward with the convention. And the city attorney said that he did not see a way that they could not do that without being held legally accountable. So, I mean, it goes both ways with that contract.
So, Katie, the Charlotte Agenda conducted a poll last week. You asked, quote, political beliefs aside, and I'm not sure how people can do that these days, but you asked, political beliefs aside, should Charlotte host the Republican National Convention given the current situation with COVID-19? What were the results of that poll?
It's interesting because by and large, I mean, I think it was something around 60% of people had said, political beliefs aside, maybe it's not a good idea, given the current situation with the pandemic, given the fact that we don't know where things are going to be, in a few months. There were actually I don't mean to sound surprised, but sometimes when it comes to political stuff like this, people can have very strong opinions, and that they might kind of throw some of politically charged comments out about this. But this was extremely thoughtful. We got some great responses about how maybe right now is not the right time. This is inherently a politically charged discussion, but it's also one that people are thinking of public safety first. And we have to think about the well-being of our residents as well as the visitors when considering how on earth to conduct a convention of this magnitude with a pandemic still going on. So I was very surprised to hear that so many people, 61% said no. Wow.
So we've been in phase 2, a modified version of what the governor had planned for phase 2 to be. We're in the first week of it as of 5 o'clock on this Friday afternoon, today, if you're listening to us live on Friday morning. And we continue to see an increase in positive cases and an increase in deaths. State health officials reported yesterday another triple-digit single-day increase in Mecklenburg County. I think it's the 6th time in 2 weeks. These numbers may have changed since yesterday, but the 6th time in 2 weeks that 100 or more new local cases have been reported within a 24-hour period. Is this increase in cases because we are increasing testing?
The actual case numbers, absolutely. We are doing a lot more testing than we were, and so it shouldn't be a big surprise that number is going up. And but I think we should look at some other numbers as well. And one of the ones I'm looking at right now is hospitalizations. And that's a lagging indicator. So it only tells us people who got sick, like a week or 2 ago. But those numbers have been going up, I think, in response to the reopening phase 1. So there's a lag time between when that started and what we're seeing right now. But those numbers have gone up from 400 statewide in April to now over 700 cases, and they've been going up for the last few days. And that's an absolute number. That is not based on percentage of tests or anything. That tells us that the number of people who are sick enough to be in the hospital is going up. The number of deaths is going up as well. And as an individual, that's one of the numbers I'm looking at to decide if it's time for me to get out there and start mingling again. And I'm just not convinced yet.
Did these rising numbers come as a surprise to health officials, or did they anticipate them when we would start reopening things back up? Does anybody know the answer to that?
I don't think that they anticipated such a spike in hospitalizations. I think they anticipated the rise in cases, especially with the fact that we are testing more. What's noteworthy too about the hospitalizations is that I think it was a few weeks ago, hospitals started conducting, non-essential surgeries, or, things like if you have an ACL tear, if you need to repair a hip, things like that, non-emergency surgeries. So that takes up hospitals space. And so the fact that they are filling hospital rooms with non-COVID patients too, if we have, this spike, if we have a surge locally in COVID-19 cases that are very serious, that could put a major strain on hospitals. And as you recall, they did not move forward with that field hospital that they had originally projected needing, because they made more room in hospitals and because they suspended other surgeries. So this is an ongoing concern that Governor Cooper mentioned yesterday as something that they're paying very close attention to.
And I don't think we need to be worried about the hospital rooms at this point. I mean, we did flatten the curve, which is a good thing. I think the point here is that the virus is still out there, it's still spreading, and that if we're trying to make decisions about whether to go out to the restaurant tonight, these are the things we should consider.
And the numbers are still rising. I typed this out yesterday, and so it looks like by triple digits. This is yesterday's piece of paper, and this is today's piece of paper. And the triple digits, it means that we have 25,546 cases in the state today. Yesterday, it was 25,416. 860 deaths statewide. Mecklenburg County, 3,645 cases. That's 40 more than yesterday. State has, we have the highest in the state, and 87 deaths. That's one more death than yesterday. Restaurants have been allowed to reopen, etc. Mecklenburg County is using 3 metrics to measure the spread of this virus. They show slight increases coinciding with less social distancing and looser restrictions. Are people just becoming too relaxed when they go out? They're not keeping 6 feet apart, and now we're being told 6 feet may not be enough. Are they not wearing masks? Why do they? Or is it simply that more people are out and commingling, and that's why these cases are going up? Do they know why it's going up?
Relaxing these orders, came with strong words from state and Mecklenburg County officials about doing all the things that you need to do to keep safe. I mean, remember when this first started, we all talked about, we got to wash our hands and we got to stay apart and we should wear a mask. And, those things are all still active. We still need to be doing that. And to the extent that we're preventing it. And they say that social distancing is still better than it was before all of this. But I do think there's a correlation here between how well we observe all of those things and also whether we decide that it's okay to go out. And I still think there are, I don't know the numbers. I haven't seen a poll on this, but I'm curious what percentage of people are wary about going out yet, and I think that it's a higher number than we think. I mean, Katie's number from that poll that you guys did suggests that more people are wary than aren't. So
I don't know if it's just simply people going out versus not going out. Even if you are going out, I think the majority of people that you see don't have a mask on, because there's been a stigma now attached to people that wear a mask, and almost kind of singling people who do wear masks out in public, singling them out. And so you go out in public, the majority of people that you see, grocery stores, don't have masks on.
And many of them are young people who think they're not going to be affected by this, but health officials across the country are now saying that they're seeing a lot of young people being hospitalized by this, Joe.
And I'm wondering if health officials are going to take stronger stances on masks. They've been hesitant to make it mandatory to wear a mask inside a business or when you're leaving your house. But it seems like the trend across the nation is that they are starting to make these masks mandatory.
Do we understand the reluctance? Do we understand the reluctance of why? We make people wear helmets when they ride motorcycles and bicycles. We make people wear seatbelts when they drive in a car. It's a law. If you are a drunk driver and your excuse is, well, I'm only endangering myself and it's my life. No, you're not. You're endangering other people.
I think it's just
why it's
simple.
illegal. So why let me finish my comment here. So why are we so reluctant to make people wear masks?
I think just look at the Memorial Day ceremony where Vice President or Joe Biden and his wife went to the ceremony. They had masks on, and President Donald Trump made fun of them. I think, simply put, there's been a political statement attached to wearing a mask. And, people just, it's unfortunate.
But health officials are not supposed to be involved in politics. Why are they not saying we must mandate this?
They have been hesitant to issue a mandate because there are still some issues with people getting face coverings, and they're sympathetic to that. But really, the whole thing about wearing masks, there are some people who think it's just stupid and that you look dumb doing it, which I think is a completely bogus.
But Joe, there are people who
masks.
argued for years about seat belts and about
Exactly, and bike helmets and motorcycle helmets and everything else like that. But it's just not a valid reason not to wear a mask.
And there's not a valid comparison with seatbelts or helmets, because the idea behind wearing a mask is that I'm not protecting myself, I'm protecting you, and your mask protects me. It's one thing to decide that you're not going to wear a helmet and you might fall off your motorcycle and get killed. Okay, that's your own fault. You're taking full responsibility. A mask, this is the difficult thing for people. A mask is about taking responsibility for everyone else, and that is really hard for Americans.
Humanity and compassion for one another.
There are some legitimate reasons why somebody can't wear a mask for health issues, but the overwhelming amount of people not wearing masks are doing so for personal choice.
So, Katie, Charlotte Agenda reports, and we know this to be the fact, that there's an increase in hospitalizations. I think 702 people in the hospital. Is that statewide as of yesterday with COVID?
Yeah, that's
19?
it's up to 708 now.
Do we have any? Okay, just see, it's gone up 6 since yesterday. Do you have any information about how seriously these people are suffering? Are they on ventilators? Are we going through with those patients what they went through with patients in New York?
I don't know about ventilators. Joe, do you happen to know if that's a statewide data point that they provide? I don't think it is.
I don't believe so. But they said that we don't have any issues with supplies right now for ventilators wise, at least locally.
Yeah, that's not on the data dashboard for the state.
But they're not telling us how serious these cases are, because not everybody comes down with the same level of medical complication.
Correct. But it is my understanding that when you go to the hospital, you are considered one of the most serious of cases of COVID. Most people who get COVID do not have to go to the hospital. They are told to ride it out at home. In New York, you basically were turned away from the hospital if you could still breathe on your own because they had so little space. I don't think that it's quite that bad here, but it is concerning that these cases do continue to grow.
Excuse me. There is this push around the state to reopen things, and you can understand why, because the economics of staying closed is horrific. And yesterday, a bill passed through the state legislature that would allow bars to reopen outdoors and would allow restaurants, brew pubs, distilleries, wine bars, etc., to operate at 50% capacity, both inside and out, in spite of these increases in COVID-19 cases and the increases in hospitalizations rising across the state. Any idea, we only have 30 seconds, what the governor's reaction to this bill is? Will he sign it? Will he veto it? Anybody?
It doesn't seem like he wants to sign this bill based on his comments at the press conference.
So we'll talk about a little bit more about that bill as it wound its way through the House and Senate yesterday in Raleigh, and then also the fact that people are suing now to reopen. That's a new move. We'll talk about that when we come back, among other things. It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina, supporting virtual doctor visits so people can continue to get routine healthcare checkups and other urgent care. More information at bluecrossnc.com/coronavirus. The news roundup continues in 20 minutes on 1A, the national look at things. The number of coronavirus-related deaths in the U.S. has crossed the 100,000 mark. There are 1.7 million confirmed cases in this country, 5.6 million cases around the world. A black man in Minneapolis dies this week after a police officer kneels on his neck during an arrest for several minutes. Video of the act has sparked protests and riots throughout Minneapolis, causing its mayor to call for the intervention of the National Guard. That doesn't seem to be working out very well, however. They'll be covering all of those stories and more coming up in 20 minutes on 1A right here on WFAE, and we will continue our local news roundup in 30 seconds.
How are you holding up in this era of social distancing? What unexpected ways has your life changed?
To be taking care of so many people, but yet not knowing if the people closest to you are going to be okay and taken care of. That, I think, is the hardest for me.
What do you think life will look like moving forward? Share your story with WFAE and be a part of our series, Social Distancing. Leave a voicemail at 704-916-9114 or go to WFAE.org for more information.
WFAE's local news roundup underway. I'm Mike Collins along with David Borax from WFAE, Joe Bruno from WSOC TV Channel 9, Eyewitness News, Jonathan Lowe, reporter anchor for Spectrum News, and Katie Peralta, senior editor of the Charlotte Agenda. Breweries have partially reopened, as have restaurants under phase 2. The ABC Commission now says that bottle and wine shops can serve drinks again. And there's this bill that passed yesterday that, if the governor signs it, would allow brew pubs and distilleries and wine bars to operate at 50% capacity inside and out. If restaurants and breweries and bottle and wine shops are already opening and serving customers, why can't bars?
Well, as the way that Dr. Mandy Cohen, the state's Health and Human Services Secretary, explained it earlier in the week, that there's more of a potential when people are at a bar versus when there's a restaurant and you sit down, that people congregate for a longer period of time. And so the longer that you have people congregating in close quarters, the higher the potential for those particles to swirl around in the air and infect more people.
And this is all about risk too. They didn't want to reopen everything at once and, risk overwhelming the hospital system. So that's kind of why they didn't roll out everything that they said they were going to in phase 2. And bars were one of the places that were on the chopping block.
Another place, there's a lot of inconsistencies to at least in some people's minds, there are a lot of inconsistencies to what can open and what cannot open. And Catherine Rice is the owner of the Art of Motion Pilates in Southern Pines. She says she mainly works one-on-one with clients. She can't open because she's classified as a physical fitness or gym. And if she's working one-on-one, she wants to know what's the difference between that and a hairstylist. Is there a difference?
So for gyms and fitness facilities, what the health officials have been citing is that super spreader study that was in Seattle with the choir, where there was like a couple people who were asymptomatic, and then tons of people in this choir ended up getting COVID-19. Some of them ended up dying because just the type of breathing that's involved with singing is different than you and I just having a conversation across from each other. So that's right. What they were worried with these gyms and fitness facilities was those deep breaths that you have to take as you're working out would possibly contribute to the spread of this virus.
So a group of gym owners in Wake County are suing Governor Cooper for not allowing them to open. Strip clubs are also suing now, a coalition of them here in Charlotte, including Crazy Horse, Charlotte, Club Onyx, the Gentleman's Club, and 3 leather and lace locations. Who knew they had 3 locations in Charlotte? Have filed a lawsuit in federal court asking the court to stop the executive order. Joe, you looked at some of these businesses filing for restraining orders against the governor. Some were successful, some were not. What can you tell us?
So basically they're arguing that this executive order is unconstitutional. And one thing they are also citing is the 14th Amendment, saying that there's a constitutional guarantee that no person or group will be denied the protection under the law that is enjoyed by similar persons or groups. So basically arguing that, hey, some of these businesses can reopen. It's not fair that ours can't.
Well, this mirrors actions that took place here in Charlotte in 1918 during the flu epidemic, because businesses back then sued, some of them did, because they couldn't make a profit while closed. So a couple of weeks ago, we spoke to Dr. Lauren Austin, the author of Afraid to Breathe, Understanding North Carolina's Experiences in the 1918-1919 Influenza Pandemic. And I asked her point blank if those businesses were successful in their efforts to sue.
No, they weren't. The judge did not buy that. They said that the Board of Health had no intention to restrict their profit. It was more for the good of public health.
So does that mean there is judicial or precedent here?
I mean, it depends on the judges and it depends on the arguments. That's why some of these lawsuits are in superior court, others are in federal. It depends on, who's making the arguments and where for their best shot at winning. But, for churches, they were successful. You have a constitutional right to worship. Do you have a constitutional right to go to a trampoline park? That'll be what the judge will have.
And some churches are reopening. I think Catholic churches have been given the go-ahead by Bishop Jugas to reopen their sanctuaries to worshipers, but it's based on the opinion of the pastor of that church. They decide how and when and how many, but that's happening right now. There has been an ongoing series of protests on the streets against this business shutdown here and around the country, and one of the movements is called Reopen NC. Adam Smith is the husband of that movement's leader. He posted a video to Facebook last week in which he said he is willing to kill people to protect the country against what he calls the New World Order.
At the end of the day, the only thing that's going to secure our freedoms is our willingness to step up and fight. Do we want to pick up arms? Do we want to kill anybody? Of course not. Nobody wants to take lives. We don't want to kill anybody. But are we willing to kill people? Are we willing to lay our lives down? We have to say yes.
Wow. Facebook took the post down, but Adam Smith's wife Ashley reported it, saying that he was under attack from the liberal media, and that though he could have said it better, it is not for, quote, anyone to decide how a free person should speak their mind. This guy is a Marine Corps veteran. Wouldn't a comment like that automatically put him on a terrorist watch list? I'm serious about this.
It's just, I'm sure there are a lot of great people in that movement who have genuine concerns about their livelihoods and not being able to reopen and make money. But that guy is just such a horrible representation of what that group is. And those comments are completely unacceptable and out of line. And I don't know what else to say. Like, it's just so wrong what he said. Like, that's not right.
And it provides a really startling contrast to the other protests that we're seeing across the country against police brutality. Something that is affecting a large part of our community. And I just have a lot of trouble garnering sympathy for people who threaten to kill other people over reopening businesses when there are African-American people being murdered, and they're protesting that. And it really puts things into perspective, and it really makes you pause.
And I think it's a statement of privilege and entitlement. This week, Mecklenburg County Commissioners informally approved a budget for the next fiscal year. It keeps property tax rates steady, and it gives CMS a $26 million increase, but it withholds $11 million of that unless CMS pays hourly employees at least $15 an hour. How unusual is a demand like that in the county budget allocation to the schools, or to anybody else for that matter?
It's really unusual for the county commission here to suggest that they want to spend more money on something related to the schools. The history is that the schools ask for money and the county commission trims the budget back a bit. I think this is important, though. We've seen this movement over the past couple of years to raise the minimum wage in our area. It is one of the key solutions to so many of our problems, including the issue about affordable housing. I mean, there's the supply of housing, but there's also what people can afford. And I think it's a strong statement by the county commission to let's bring everybody up to the same level if we can, or to a minimum level.
Has the school board responded? Because this is telling them, we'll give you this money, but you have to raise your hourly employees' wages. Have they responded to this?
I haven't seen a response from the school.
Okay. Again, there's no property tax hike in this budget. There is, however, a 3% proposed raise for employees, but the budget is not without controversy. Commissioner Susan Hardin had this exchange with County Manager Dina DiOrio.
The county manager is recommending cutting libraries, cutting more money to CMS, cutting affordable housing, cutting arts, and cutting reading programs.
There's nothing in here that we believe would have irreparable harm. So I don't appreciate you portraying it that I'm cutting education and art and reading programs, because that's just not the case.
That last voice is Dina DiOrio, the county manager. Is it unusual for a county manager to take that tone with a commissioner because they employ her?
I've noticed she's had that tone recently, though, in her conversations with the commissioners. And we saw that tone as well with the RNC discussion when they were toying around not providing $50,000 for cybersecurity consulting.
And remember, the commission's job is to set policy. The manager's job is to actually carry it out and figure out the nitty-gritty details. And I think there's some pushing and shoving going here about, you know, that line right there.
Where's the truth in Susan Hardin's accusations? Is there truth in them?
You look at the levels that affordable housing was funded last year. Yes, there is less money for affordable housing this year in the county's budget. Some would argue, though, in the past, the county hasn't contributed money to affordable housing at all. So this is an improvement. The other thing you have to keep in mind is the county's budget is not the city's budget. It's not in good shape. The city's budget is in good shape. The county has to dip into reserves and get a whole lot of money from those funds. The county has to make cuts somewhere. And this is the best move that Dina DiOrio could come up with, she says. And as she said, none of these cuts are going to cause irreparable harm.
And one of the ways they made cuts was to make cuts to the Arts and Science Council, among other organizations. The commission decided to retain that cut for at least 6 months. And the ASC, as we all know, has been scrambling ever since last November, when voters said no to the sales tax hike for the arts, parks, and education, which they were depending on because they were already hurting. So does this cut their funding further, or reduce it from the original, or just reduce it from the original proposed budget? Do we know?
I know it's less money than what the Art and Science Council was hoping for. But I believe for the most part, their funding is pretty level compared to last year.
Meanwhile, David, arts groups, many of them who are usually balanced on the razor's edge when it comes to their finances, are getting some emergency funding from Charlotte's COVID-19 response fund, $275,000. Where is this money coming from, and where is it going?
So that COVID-19 response fund was started back in March by the Foundation for the Carolinas and the United Way, and they've raised $19 million since then in private donations. These have come from corporations and individuals, and they have been doling out money bit by bit over the past couple of months. I think more than $10 million now. This round of funding went specifically to arts groups. It includes things like $75,000 for Discovery Place to support digital learning and maintain its living collection exhibits for a couple of months. There's $40,000 in there for this initiative by Charlotte Center City Partners to help musicians in the community with their own relief fund. There's money for dance organizations, Charlotte Art League, the Gantt Center for its series that it's doing on the COVID-19 and issues in the African American community, Goodyear Arts, all kinds of groups are getting money here to help them through this tough times. And some of the larger organizations in town have gotten PPP, Paycheck Protection Program grants. But for these groups here in Charlotte, this may be some of the limited amount of money that they can get.
So because of COVID-19, the state mandated that schools go back into session, the public schools go back into session on August the 17th. The CMS had decided they were going to delay the start of school until after the Republican National Convention. At least this was all the plan prior to COVID-19. Well, now there's a question about whether the convention will take place here at all. And they have to go back to school August 17th, but they came up with a plan on how to accomplish both this week. What did they decide, Jonathan?
So, Mike, they are going to, it's real simple. They're just, so the week, they're going to start, as you said, on August 17th. The next week is RNC, the 24th to the 27th. And so CMS voted and decided to have kids do remote learning during that week. And so you won't at least have the school buses and all of the commuting that goes on to and from school, at least during the week of the RNC. So there shouldn't be, the conflict there should be minimized.
Is there a plan for schools if we can't go back to classrooms? I mean, if we go back to classrooms, that seems to be an argument that you could have a convention.
I don't know. I think that still remains to be seen exactly, the hardcore impacts of what this next school year is going to look like. But you at least, like I said, you won't have the conflict of all of that traffic happening at the same time, and kids will be, which is something they've already kind of gotten used to with how this past school year ended with the remote learning. So,
Mike, the talk about schools, at least across the country, has been, separating the desks 6 feet apart and not having everybody eat lunch in the same cafeteria at the same. So in a way, they're preparing for social distancing measures to be in place when you return to the school building, unlike the RNC, which didn't put the social distancing measures in that letter yesterday to Governor Roy Cooper.
Meanwhile, back in Raleigh, there was a near unanimous vote yesterday in the House to pass funding and rules to prepare for a spike in voting by mail. And we know that the Republican Party is generally opposed to voting by mail, and this is a Republican-controlled legislature, but it was near unanimous. What would this mean for voters in the fall?
The thing to keep in mind is North Carolina is a no excuse vote by mail state. So you don't need to be absent from your jurisdiction to cast a ballot through the mail. If you want to vote through mail, you have that right as a North Carolina voter. Now it will be easier for you to request an absentee ballot. I believe they're going to set up a way that you can request it online. And they are also only requiring one witness now for you. In the past, you needed 2 people to sign your ballot before it to be valid. Now you just need one person to sign off on it after you make your selections.
The Senate, the North Carolina Senate, is set to take up that bill next week, but that bill also prohibits the state from moving to a 100% vote by mail election. So it just makes it slightly easier for those who need to avail themselves of that if COVID-19 continues by November. That's all the time we have. We don't even have time to talk about the president's tweets today. Oh, darn. David Borax from WFAE News, Katie Peralta from Charlotte Agenda, Jonathan Lowe from Spectrum News, and Joe Bruno from WSSC TV Channel 9. Thank you all for the hour.
Charlotte Talks with Mike Collins is a production of 90.7 WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from Mazda of South Charlotte,